Hello and welcome to The Big Picture. I'm Tina Jha. The first week of the monsoon session of Parliament was washed away. Protests by opposition parties over several issues, ranging from the Pegasus controversy to the farmers' agitation, paralysed functioning of both houses. In Rajya Sabha, Trinamool Congress MP Shantanu was suspended for the remaining part of the monsoon session for snatching and tearing off the statement on Pegasus, which the Minister for Electronics and Information Technology, Ashwini Vaishnaw, was reading. The motion seeking his suspension was moved by Minister of State for Parliamentary Affairs V Muraleedharan and was then passed by a voice vote. Rajya Sabha Chairman Venkaiah Naidu termed the incident a clear assault on parliamentary democracy. He expressed anguish over repeated disruptions in the House and urged members to allow meaningful discussions on people-centric issues to take place in Parliament. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will take a look at the week gone by, wherein proceedings of the Parliament remain paralysed due to disruptions, the concerns raised by the Rajya Sabha chairman over frequent disruptions and condemnable actions by MPs that lowered the dignity of the Parliament and also our democracy, and what is the way ahead to ensure that dissent and debate, but not disruptions, remain the acceptable norm in the functioning of Parliament. Joining me to discuss these aspects are two distinguished panelists. Let me introduce them to you. I have with me on the program today Mr. Deshratan Nigam, he's a constitutional expert, and Mr. Shekhar Iyer, he's a senior journalist. Welcome, gentlemen, on this edition of The Big Picture. Mr. Nigam, let me begin the program today with you. In fact, it's become a matter of grave concern, not just to those who are associated with the Parliament, but also with the common public who are slowly their faith on democracy, on Parliament is slowly weaning away, because session after session we are witnessing the same thing. Protests over inconsequential issues which directly do not impact people, then leading to adjournments in the House and precious time being lost, which otherwise should be used to debate the people-centric issues. Every session we are seeing that one or the other incident that shames, that lowers the dignity of the House takes place, and then we are forced to debate that issue. Help us understand what has, in recent years, led to this increasing trend of disruptions. And in a way, disruptions today seem to have become the more acceptable norm instead of debate and dissent in the House.
Tinaji, one thing is very clear, that what we are seeing today is clearly unacceptable. And especially since we know live streaming of the parliamentary proceedings takes place whenever the Parliament is in session, and the entire country is watching. And the people who are disrupting regularly have been exposed. However, having said that, let me tell you one thing, is that the training and selection of candidates is something which is of paramount importance. The kind of persons you select for contesting the elections, and thereafter the training on parliamentary conduct and ethics is very, very important. And many members of the Parliament do not take that very seriously, and hence are unable to internalize those simple procedures. What we saw in the Parliament especially started when the Prime Minister was introducing new ministers. He was not even allowed to introduce them. And that's a new low in the history of Indian Parliament and its proceedings. And then subsequently, Shantanu is snatching away the papers and clearing them was another, blot. And the chairman's anguish is very, very justified. This is crippling of the, Indian Parliament, the functioning of Indian Parliament. The place is there to debate and discuss and to see whether government is performing its job or not.
Certainly.
And especially the policies which are laid down there and those are being implemented. What are the shortcomings? And constructive suggestions have to come from the, everybody, including the, members of the Treasury and as well as the opposition benches. But they are not coming, and they walk out. And most of the bills you see are being passed almost unanimously, and the real discussions and debates do not take place. And therefore, the constructive and effective input for formulation of the laws and policies is not coming from the opposition side. And I think the opposition parties have to do a lot of soul searching. And this trend actually became from 2014 onwards, although earlier also there were disruptions. but not to allow the Prime Minister to introduce his ministers and snatching papers from the hands of the ministers and tearing it away, I think that's a new no.
Absolutely. Mr. Iyer, as someone who has covered parliamentary procedures for several decades now, what do you think has led to a situation now wherein the parliament today, instead of debating, discussing issues related to the people for their larger benefit and also discussing issues related to policy, now we are seeing parliament slowly converting into a stage of protest by the opposition parties. In session after session, we are seeing a slugfest between the government and the opposition. And every time there's a new law that we talk about in the sense of the unruly scenes that we witness, the unruly behavior that we see coming in from the members of parliament. What change have you seen over these years, and what has led to such a kind of situation today?
Well, Tina ji, if I have to say it in a brief manner, I would say it is the quality of leadership that we are seeing today, particularly in the opposition benches, that is squarely responsible for what is happening for the last few years we are seeing. Parliament is meant for debate. Parliament is meant for discussion. Parliament can also be a place where there can be very serious disagreements, but that need not lead to disruption of the kind we are witnessing today.
Certainly.
I mean, that is I would say, to say the least, it is very unfortunate. But in terms of what the message goes for the posterity, I think it's very, very serious, because the actions of today damage the credibility of an institution. Now, whatever issues that the opposition has to raise against the government, they have all the freedom and the right to do so. But the supreme irony today is, here is a government that is willing to discuss the issues. Here is a government that says, both in the all-party meeting as well as in the speakers' meeting before the start of the session, that they are willing to allot all time that is necessary for every single issue to be raised. And we see that opposition member leaders also nod in agreement. But as soon as the House begins session, what we notice is a theater of, I would say, sometimes pure nonsense. Because, when the government is willing to discuss through a structured debate, whatever be the controversy, whether it is the spyware or whatever, when the government is willing to discuss, to hear the opposition members and give its reply, why is the opposition shying from a proper debate? And also, is it because, it used to be said, actually it is a joke among lawyers, which Nigam would definitely bear me out, that when the lawyer has an argument, he makes an argument. When he doesn't have an argument, he will bang the table. This is the joke in the bar. Now, same thing is happening in the parliament, because whatever controversy that is being raised can be discussed if the person who wants to raise it has some argument. But what we are seeing here is, you create a hullabaloo outside parliament, then you create a kind of a thing that the government is not democratic, government is not willing to listen, government doesn't want to discuss. Then, in order to further your argument, and to continue this narrative you want, you disrupt the parliament. Now, I also mentioned about the quality of leadership. We have just seen Shantanu Sen. He's a doctor by profession. I mean, he's an educated person. Such a person should attempt something which can only impress no one other than his leader, that is Mamata Banerjee. Mamata's own track record in parliament was full of histrionics. We know how she threw away shawl at the then Lok Sabha Speaker Somnath Chatterjee as a way of protest against a particular issue. Now, if you have leaders who appreciate, or they think that this is the best way to show your prowess and strength, what kind of debate can take place?
So do you think even when the educated members of parliament engage in such kind of unruly behavior, do you think the parliament slowly has become a platform for political grandstanding, as you're suggesting?
No, not just grandstanding, but there can be a grandstanding with arguments. There can be a grandstanding with articulation of views. But what we are seeing is that there is no articulation of views. This is some repeating some allegations. Then you say, we will not let the government speak. We will not let the government explain our charges. Is it because they are afraid of counter arguments? I do not know. But what I definitely see is today's leadership in the opposition ranks is a kind of leadership that believes in shouting, that believes in brawl, that believes in intimidation, and with the hope of sending a message that they are so excited and angry over issues concerning people, I think their purpose is not going to be served. Rather, if they are able to raise the issues on the floor of the House, marshal the arguments, point out where the flaw lies, point out what are the lacunae in the government functioning or in the government response, I think they will serve the public cause better. Tina ji.
Certainly. Mr. Nigam, so the kind of protests and the unruly behavior, the unparliamentary behavior that we are seeing more often by the members of parliament and worryingly in the House of Elders, the suspension of Shantanu Sen was not the first. In fact, in recent sessions, we've seen a number of such actions having taken place against members of parliament by the chair for disrespecting the chair, for unruly behavior in the House. But this, clearly what we are seeing is not serving as a deterrent. So what should be the way ahead so that, the dignity of the House remains intact? There is no disrepute to the parliament, especially the upper house of parliament, which is the House of Elders.
Tina ji, I think the suspension is not proving as a deterrence, as you have rightly pointed out. In fact, the termination should be brought in for such kind of, misdemeanor or grave disorder, as the rule book says. And once you have the termination of membership for the entire period of the Lok Sabha, the particular Lok Sabha, I think that can act as a deterrence. Mere suspension for the remaining period of for 1 day or fixed number of days is certainly not proving to be a deterrence. And especially, being telecasted throughout the world, such proceedings, undermines the image of India, its standing. And everybody's looking at us. India being the largest democracy, people look up to us. And such kind of a behavior, and people tend to bring their political strategy of a particular party, which should be within a party, inside the parliament. Say, for example, Mamata Banerjee is not even a member of the parliament. Now they have taken a decision that she will become the parliamentary head of their parliamentary party. So this is way of indirectly coming in, and maybe this, whatever has happened to, by Shantanu Sen, could be related to that. Create a kind of, grandstanding in a manner, so that, path is paved way for Mamata Banerjee to come inside the parliament indirectly, although she cannot take part in the parliamentary proceedings, not being a member. But those two incidents have coincided with each other. Look at their timings also. So that was quite a low level of politics. And we require, and numerous suspensions have taken place over the period of time.
Yes.
Even in this last budget session also, there were suspensions. But it is not proving to be a deterrence. We have to go to the second level, and there should be a parliamentary committee discussing and debating about as to how to make it more stringent, how to make it as deterrent so that people don't repeat such kind of a behavior.
Mr. Iyer, what do you think regarding the parliamentary procedures and the rules under which such actions are taken for unruly conduct and unparliamentary behavior, which undermine the dignity of the House? So do we merely need to strengthen, or do we need to bring about new kind of rules to check such kind of behavior?
Well, definitely, I think it is a time to look at the rules governing the conduct of a member inside the House. In fact, whenever the presiding officers have their regular conferences, the presiding officers, the speakers of various assemblies, they always meet annual conferences which are presided over by the Lok Sabha Speaker. In those conferences, several suggestions have been made, and they have even presented reports as to how to, ensure decorum and order inside the legislature. And there have been mentions on how to prevent these members coming into the well of the House, speaking out of turn. These are, some of it involves elementary courtesies, which every member has to imbibe and show inside the House.
Certainly.
But unfortunately, what has happened is these recommendations and these are completely forgotten. And the other thing which is worrying me, Tina ji, is nowadays, a member after a conduct like this thinks that he has, performed some great act instead of feeling ashamed. When you don't have a sense of shame, as to your conduct like this, what can we do? Because after all, this is, I can understand even in a state legislature where the MLAs are far younger, not exposed to so much of public affairs. But you come to Parliament, which is the highest forum in the country, and in the Parliament, particularly the upper house, which is the House of Elders, which should be a standing example of conduct when it comes to parliamentary proceedings. Here you find the members come and tear it up. There are others to cheer him. His own party leader will cheer him. And when there is a stricture coming from the chair, I mean, if I was a member of parliament and I were to hear what the chairman Venkaiah ji has said in his order, I would be ashamed. But today there is no sense of shame. In fact, they feel that they have done some great act, and by this process, they think that they have put the government in the dock. I think the fundamental problem is, Tina ji, these members do not have an argument to sustain on the floor of the House on any particular subject, and they are not willing to hear a counter argument lest they be shown as, making all false allegations and false arguments. So the ideal way out is you attempt to raise a bogey of a big controversy, and then you don't want the government to reply or counter because you do not want to be seen as on a strong footing, because there seems to be a design and a strategy. Because there have been occasions when members have sometimes lost their cool. We have seen such occasions, and subsequently those members have even apologized, saying that in the heat of the moment they behaved this way. But what we are seeing today is a design, is a strategy where to show, look, we have won in Bengal, we have won the assembly elections, so we are the party with muscle, we are the party with brawn, so we can do whatever because the people of Bengal have voted us. This kind of what I would call it is a street fighter politics definitely affects the functioning of parliament, because parliament is not a place to show your muscles.
Absolutely.
Parliament is a place where you exchange ideas, you argue your ideas. Yes, whatever controversy, because they do not realize, and unfortunately, if you really want to put the government in the dock, you have to make very forcible arguments, and that itself can show that the government has not been able to reply. Now, what is also happening, there is another impact which is happening on the media, because media is in the hunt for headlines. Because many members of parliament have told me, when there is a good debate in the House, the media does not cover it. Media is only interested in disruption and this kind of toka-toki, and that it is not helping the viewers with good coverage. But that is not so, because if there is a good debate, if there are good strong points, we have seen, it is not that such debates have not taken place. Even in the last 5 years, there have been very good debates. Very good arguments have been made by opposition members, and equally good replies have been given by ministers concerned.
In fact, even this week, when the House discussed the COVID pandemic, the discussion was one that took place, which was very, very meaningful, very, very appealing to people. But that was just one day in the entire week. Out of 4 days, the session, the proceedings were washed away for 3 days, and just one day for a few hours when the House discussed the COVID pandemic. And in fact, the chairman said in his message that we must have more debates such as the recent one on the COVID pandemic, which largely impact the people, so that the elected representatives bring forth the voices of the people in parliament and also discuss solutions with the government as well. But, it's quite worrying, Mr. Nigam, with the way the things are turning out to be, and what Mr. Iyer says, the kind of bogey that the opposition parties create in both houses of parliament with no substance to what they are protesting against, basically inconsequential issues to say, and the larger agenda is only to make the parliament dysfunctional. In such a scenario, obviously, it is not just the people who are being impacted, but a significant impact also on the younger people who are entering politics, on the younger breed of parliamentarians as well, because their social inclusion into this entire parliamentary procedure depends to a large extent on what they see their seniors doing. So this is a very, very worrying trend, and this needs to be corrected.
It certainly is a worrying trend, Tina ji, and especially on an issue. Say, for example, Pegasus. Pegasus, nobody knows from where the list came, from whose server it came, it's a cooked up list or not. And those were the issues that could have been discussed. And when you run away from discussion and debate, clearly means you have nothing to say on merits. And therefore, you only want, as Mr. Iyer was saying, the media time, the media coverage. And as a person who goes to debate on TV debates every day, let me tell you, Mr. Iyer is spot on, 100% is spot on when he says they don't discuss meaningful, serious discussions in the parliament. And that is where the change is coming about, and which is quite worrisome. The younger generation is, let me tell you, is quite smart, and they are watching through live streaming and through various coverage. Otherwise, if the media doesn't cover, there are other ways of knowing things, and that they are watching. And parliament represents the will of the people through their elected representatives, and that will is defeated, destroyed. And the moment you run away, walk out of the parliament, do not take part cause grave disorders in the functioning of the House. And therefore, this requires a very serious effort on the part of political parties. One, I remember that BJP has, sessions, training sessions for their young MPs when they come, freshers and even the old ones. And once they come, they are told about parliamentary procedure, ethics and conduct and how the kind of conduct they should have inside the parliament. I want other parties should also, take up that kind of training program. And, the culture that is coming from TMC is not good. The post-poll violence that we saw and the NHRC's, comment and the report, the castigating report that was there, and some of it is rubbing inside our parliament also. I think we need to be very, very careful. Certain strict amendments have to be brought in the rule book and the rules of conduct. And once that happens, maybe this will act as a deterrence, and the people, instead of showing, this negative grandstanding, as I would put it, they would not resort to and take part in the discussion and ask very hard, meaningful questions as Prime Minister Modi wanted them to ask, and must listen to the government as well. Because once you have a stand of the government, then only you can find, critical analysis of the implementation of policies or whatever is being presented inside the parliament. Hence, this is the right time, an opportune time to take those actions and to make these rules far strict. I won't say drastic, that's not the kind of word I use, but more strict in the context of misconduct and grave disorders as defined in the rule book.
Okay, Mr. Iyer, one final comment from you. We have seen, in fact, the former president, Mr. Pranab Mukherjee, also spoke about this. We keep hearing the current vice president raise it from his chair in capacity of the Rajya Sabha chairman. Repeated concerns over how disruptions should not take precedence over people's issues, over debate and fruitful, meaningful discussions in the House. But that seems to go unheeded session after session when we witness. Now, the problem here is that it is sending out a wrong message. It is lowering the credibility of the highest institution among the public at large. What should be done apart from the amendments, the changes that are required and that have been pointed out by Mr. Nigam? What should be done to restore people's faith in the democracy, which we are seeing is slowly fading out?
Well, I think I am entirely in agreement with Nigamji when he says there has to be strong disincentives for that kind of behavior, A. B, I think we must all realize, look, who are the people who are doing this kind of thing? What do they stand for? And today they are dreaming of one day capturing power in Delhi. You can imagine if this is the kind of ethos, political culture that they want to bring, and if they are dreaming of becoming prime ministers and ruling party of a great grand coalition, you can imagine what is in store in future, because what do they bring to the table? If they are not willing to respect basic canons of parliamentary democracy, basic canons of parliamentary conduct and proceeding, what can we expect from them? Therefore, I feel the bigger issue is, I am not at all surprised. I am not against X party or Y party. But Trinamool Congress leadership has always encouraged this kind of behavior, forcing some of their very civil leaders to turn uncivil. This has happened in West Bengal Assembly. Have you ever seen a good debate in West Bengal Assembly? I have not heard of in the last few years. In fact, during the left front rule, we saw even much more better debate than today. Why is it that the culture that is sought to be imposed, the political culture we are seeing in Bengal, is now getting reflected in parliament? Because there is definitely a new kind of ambition, a new kind of aggression which has no purpose, no sense, without realizing that, look, here you are dealing with very serious matters. Ultimately, the entire of India is not Bengal. Therefore, for these leaders to have their own conceptions about their future, they will be completely disappointed, because people of India at large will not accept this kind of conduct. That should alone serve as a kind of warning to leaders who encourage this conduct in the first place and who turn askance also when some of their members behave like this.
Absolutely. And to ensure that meaningful debates, fruitful discussions relating to people's issues, so that these do not become a thing of the past. Some suggestions which both our panelists have made as to reforms and certain amendments to strengthen the parliamentary procedures, and strong disincentives for those who undermine the parliamentary ethos of the country. These are something that we require urgently to ensure that disruptions do not take precedence over people's issues in Parliament, and the purpose which the Parliament is supposed to serve, to discuss and debate people-centric issues, policies that relate and directly impact people, because largely it's all about people. They are the ones who elect representatives to Parliament, and they must work for the people of this country. That is paramount. With that, I'll have to call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you once again to both my guests for joining me on the program for this very, very healthy discussion on how to ensure that disruptions do not become an acceptable norm when it comes to parliamentary functioning in our country. Thank you once again for joining us on the program. So that's it from us on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you for your time.